Just a note before we get started today, this podcast contains highly distressing themes involving child sexual abuse. So if you're not in the right headspace to listen or watch this episode, maybe skip this one and come back tomorrow. And if you or anyone you know needs support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Sam Koslowski.
This week we learned a 26-year-old childcare worker has been charged with 70 offences, including child rape, in Victoria. It has led to an immediate and statewide response that has impacted thousands of families in Victoria and an entire sector. So, what exactly do we know about the allegations against this man, and how are officials responding? We'll tell you what you need to know in today's podcast.
Billi, this is going to be a difficult chat to have because of the nature of this story. Before we get into the details of what's happened, give me a sense of how this all originally unfolded.
Yeah, and before I get into the details, I know we did the message at the start, but I do just really want to emphasize that the details that we're sharing today are extremely distressing.
And part of being a good, responsible news broadcaster and also a news listener for everyone listening and watching now is to know when perhaps it's not the right day to listen to this type of chat.
So when we first heard about this was on Tuesday morning when Victoria Police did a press conference with the Victorian Health Department and also the Victorian Government. And I think when you have all three of those departments involved, you know that something very serious has happened. And indeed, that was the case. So they revealed that a 26-year-old childcare worker, whose name is Joshua Brown, had been charged with more than 70 offences. And like I said at the top, that includes child rape. Now, those 70 charges relate to 8 victims at a childcare centre in Point Cook, which is a suburb in Melbourne. And the offences allegedly occurred between April 2022 and January 2023.
So at the moment, are the charges that have been laid only relating to one childcare centre?
Yes, at this stage. However, you might have heard that this man did work at 20 childcare centres across Victoria between 2017 and 2025. And he was working at a childcare centre right up until he was arrested in May this year. But yes, in terms of the charges that have been laid, police really emphasise that all of those current charges are limited to the one childcare centre. And Acting Commander Janet Stevenson, who was the person who announced this on Tuesday, she was clear in the press conference that they are not suggesting that the accused has offended against children in all of the 20 centres. However, saying that currently it is limited to the one childcare centre, police did say that they are investigating evidence of an allegation at a second childcare centre in Essendon, which is another suburb in Melbourne.
So what do we know about these charges, and has there been a plea entered by the accused at this stage?
So in terms of the charges, they include child rape, attempted child rape, they include sexual activity in the presence of a child, and they also include producing child abuse material. Those are just some of the charges, but there are many more. In terms of the victims of these alleged offences, police say that the victims were aged between 5 months and 2 years old at the time of the alleged offences.
And has he entered a plea yet?
So in terms of a plea, he hasn't. So we don't know whether or not he will plead guilty or not guilty. What the police did say is that he was cooperative with police when they arrested him.
There's some really horrific allegations. What do we know about how these families found out about all of this?
Yeah, I think before we look at how the families found out, we kind of need to understand how police found out.
Yeah.
So we don't know the exact details, but what we do know is that police say that this was a proactive investigation that didn't start through someone's complaint. So this didn't start from a family coming forward or from a child centre coming forward with a complaint. Police said that they were investigating these alleged crimes before they actually even had a victim, and they said that it took them some time to find a victim. In terms of how the families found out, so this is the timeline that Victoria Police laid out. They said that the man was arrested on the 12th of May, which is now nearly 2 months ago now.
Yeah, almost 2 months.
We then know that the families of the 8 victims were notified of the charges laid against Brown last week.
Right.
So the families of these victims were notified of what allegedly happened last week. And the police said that, as you can imagine, this was deeply distressing for the families to hear. And they're now going through this process of supporting these families who all officials have said is just all of the parents' worst nightmare.
So we know there's 8 victims here, but we also know that there must be thousands of children who were at childcare centres at the same time as the alleged offender. What's being done to kind of deal with the wider fallout to these allegations?
Yeah, so the Victorian Health Department, who, like I said, was also at this press conference on Tuesday, they said it has contacted around 2,600 families who had children who were attending the childcare centres at the same time as the accused. And they sent a letter to these families on Tuesday. So basically at the same time as the public found out, the families who didn't have alleged victims at this stage but did have children at the childcare centres, we kind of found out at the same time as them because they were only sent a letter on Tuesday informing them. And police were clear in saying that if families haven't been contacted, then it's highly unlikely that their child has been impacted. But a detail they shared, the Victorian Health Department shared, which they said is just another layer of how distressing this story has been for especially so many families in Victoria. They said that 1,200 children have been recommended as a precautionary measure to undergo testing for infectious diseases due to potential exposure risk.
Which is quite confronting to hear.
Yes. I mean, I've never heard of something like that happening before. Now, police were asked, obviously by journalists, about the nature of the kind of infection they're talking about here. And a journalist specifically asked if the man had been tested for an STI and if that's the kind of infection they're talking about. Now, police and the health department refused to answer that question. They said that that is personal health information and that they weren't going to share it, especially to protect the privacy of the children and the families involved here. But the health department did say that the potential infection they are testing for can be treated with antibiotics.
So it's all of a sudden kind of turned into quite a wide-ranging, not just investigation by police, but also a health response as well. I want to talk about the political response now. How has the Victorian government responded?
So like I said, the press conference on Tuesday was a joint one with Victoria's Premier Jacinta Allen there. And I think you could see that she was quite shocked and shaken by these allegations. She said that she is sickened by the allegations and that her heart breaks for the families that are living every parent's worst nightmare. And then on Wednesday, so yesterday, the government made some announcements about how they will be responding to this. And there were a few different things that they announced. So one was that all families whose children have been referred for precautionary testing, the one that I was just talking about, all of those families, so the 1,200 families, will be eligible for a $5,000 payment.
Interesting.
And that is designed to help families who might need to take time off work or who might now need to go to therapy, all of the health and mental health appointments that now might be required after they have learned of this information. And then separate to that, in terms of strengthening the safety of the childcare sector in Victoria, one thing they did note is that childcare is actually regulated in Australia at a national level.
Right.
So it's not done by state and territory, which education actually is, but childcare is not. But despite that, the Premier said that clearly action needs to be taken now. And so she said that the government is commissioning an urgent review into childcare safety in the state, which will be focused on the immediate actions that they can take. And they said that part of that will be looking into examining options for installing CCTV in childcare centres. And she said the review for that deadline is the 15th of August, so in about 2 months.
And I imagine that a lot of that sort of short-term response is, of course, to try and figure out where a system failed young children, but also to give families of children who continue to go to childcare centres some extra comfort.
Yes.
And that's where I think it's interesting to think about the industry as well, is that this is an industry full of mostly brilliant people, and that the sector itself needs to kind of survive this.
Yeah, and the state government said that they are also going to be working on a Victorian register for childcare workers.
Right.
But the Victorian Premier also noted that a register of childcare workers is also being looked at a national level, but they're going to do the Victorian level one first, just as a first step.
Tell me what happens next in this case. We know that the legal system, rightfully so, doesn't move fast. So this is going to go on for a while, right?
Yeah, so the man, Joshua Brown, is in jail at the moment, and he will remain there until this is dealt with at the courts. He's next due to appear at the Melbourne Magistrates Court in mid-September. So like you said, not exactly moving fast, but there are obviously reasons for that. I think for now, though, it's these thousands of families who are dealing with the immediate effects of just finding out this information. Like I said, the families of the 8 victims only found out last week, and then the thousands of families who had children at these childcare centres at the same time as him, they've only found out this week. So like we said, there is a health response, there is a police response, and there's a government response all happening right now.
And just to reiterate, at the time of recording, no plea has been entered by Joshua Brown. We work in a system which presumes innocence until we know otherwise, and the courts are now addressing his case. Billi, thank you for taking us through that really difficult story. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Daily Aus this morning. I'm actually going to read those helplines one more time. If you or anyone you know needs some support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732.